Good morning, we are Fit and Well, and hi, I hope you're having a lovely Wednesday morning. My name is Jessica Boston. I am a hypnotherapist based in London with 10 years experience, and I'm going to be talking to you today about how to beat stress and anxiety. So if you have any questions or you want to know anything about anxiety, I'm just going to be giving you some sort of really simple tips and ideas and just explain a little bit what anxiety and stress do, what they're up to, why they're there, and what you can do to just start thinking about stress and anxiety a little bit differently. So good morning, I hope you're all well. Wave. So let's talk about stress and anxiety. So I imagine if you're watching this, thank you. They're cute, aren't they? I imagine if you're watching this, everybody gets stressed and everybody gets anxiety. So there's not anybody watching this that wouldn't have experienced it or doesn't have it in some way or form. It also depends on, stress and anxiety comes into our life in different ways, and it can be sort of the occasional thing linked to a very specific stimulus, or it can become chronic if we are experiencing it often and it kind of just becomes a pattern of thinking. Because that's the thing with stress and anxiety, is you've got to look to be able to work with stress and anxiety, you've got to look at the patterns of it, you've got to look at the nature of it to make sense of it. And this is why working with stress and anxiety, there are commonalities that cross over into most people, but you want to get a kind of individual approach. You want to look at it for you. So you want to adapt everything I'm saying to you. So before we start, does anyone have any questions that I can answer about it? Anything that you want to know about stress and anxiety, or any particular concerns, we can address them now. If not, I'll just explain a little bit about stress and anxiety. Good morning, everybody. So, talking about stress and anxiety, they're different things. I'm going to talk about anxiety first. So anxiety is thoughts and feelings which are linked to uncertainty, a sense of unease, a sense of unpredictability. And what is happening is your thoughts are habitual. So we tend to get stuck in patterns of thinking. So if you tend to, in certain situations, feel like you're not going to be able to cope because you've got evidence from your past that you've not been able to cope in a similar situation in the past, what is going to happen is in the future, when you're triggered by something in your unconscious mind that says this is similar to something we've already previously experienced, then the mind sends the response that says, you need to react in some way. You either need to remove yourself from this situation or you need to respond in some way. Maybe you need to fight or leave or freeze. So anxiety is a response to something that your unconscious has registered as something that you're not going to be able to deal with very well. So the solution to coping with anxiety starts with understanding. You have to know why the unconscious believes, because it is individual to you. There's nothing pre-programmed that says you're not going to be able to cope in this very specific situation. You weren't born with an inability to cope in certain situations. What has happened is that something in your life has happened, and that has led to something in your unconscious saying, when we're in these types of situations, we don't know what to do. We don't know how to respond. Okay, I'll come to that. I have ongoing anxiety. Heart palpitations, so much therapy, it won't go away. I'm talking about heart palpitations and pains in the stomach. Yes, well, that's the thing with anxiety, is you've got to understand the line of thinking that creates the very physical response. Because when we've been doing anxiety for a long time, what happens is that the unconscious thinks we're not taking it seriously. It thinks that we're not listening to the fears that it holds, that says this is something that needs to be addressed. And even if we're going to therapy, even if we're talking about it with somebody, even if we are seemingly believing that we're taking care of what the anxiety is, it's no guarantee that we're actually looking at the thing that the unconscious fears. unless we are. Because if we are, you'll know, because the unconscious will relax the response. So if you are suffering from heart palpitations and pains in the stomach, what I would ask you to think about as you're here and you've asked this question is, what is going on in your mind when you get the heart palpitations and stomach? What is the story that your unconscious is telling you about the situation? Because if you know, you don't, to treat anxiety, you don't have to look at absolutely everything going on in your life. You have to look at the specific things it fears when it sends the response. So if you were to look at what's going on in your mind when it sends the palpitations and the pains in the stomach, then you would start to understand what the unconscious has not fully resolved or integrated yet. So, does that make sense? If you're here, Sophie Mystic, maybe you can tell us if you've got some information about that. So that's, but you see, with all of that, what that requires with dealing with anxiety is you kind of have to divide and conquer. You can't, when people look at their anxiety, what they tend to do is they treat all anxiety like it's one big lump, rather than breaking down the specific anxieties and the specific feelings and thoughts. So they tend to just sort of treat all anxiety like it's one lump. They're not looking at the specific thoughts and feelings that are occurring, that are creating the physical sensations. Because you've got to look at the very specific thoughts and feelings that the unconscious hasn't resolved and why it finds them so scary, to be able to understand what it's doing. Let me answer this question about supplements. I wouldn't want to recommend. I've heard amazing things about ashwagandha. I know my friend Sasha at Globart works with an amazing ashwagandha product. Diet plays a very important role, as does sleep. Sleep is fundamental. It is the first thing that I look at with clients, because without good sleep, your nervous system is frazzled, because that's the thing, it tends to sort of spiral, and you can spiral down very quickly. If you've got anxiety and it's keeping you up at night, then it's keeping you up at night and you're not sleeping, then you're not sleeping, that's making your anxiety worse. Start with sleep. Start at really focusing on getting a really good night's sleep, turning off your electronics, getting to bed a little bit earlier, and really prioritising, because that's another really important part of dealing with anxiety and stress, is realigning your priorities. So start prioritising sleep, getting to bed earlier, making sure that your sleep area is very comfortable, that there's nothing that bothers you, nothing that disturbs you, nothing that disrupts your nervous system, because you want your systems to be operating really, really well, your nervous system and your immune system. And let me see what Sophie Mystic has written. Yes, it makes sense. I feel all the horrors I saw growing up in a dysfunctional family, a lot of abuse. I'm so sorry for that. Then there would be things that your unconscious is potential. Again, this is all without me speaking to you face to face, but there would be things that your unconscious is still processing, and still potentially some thoughts and ideas and fears that it holds on to, that it's creating predictions about how your future will look based on how your past looked. So to be able to help the unconscious parts of your thinking, what you could do is start to affirm and help it understand that your past is not a reflection of your future. Your unconscious only can guess what your future is going to look like based on what your past looked like. When you go to sit down on a chair, you only know it's a chair because you've sat down on chairs in the past and somebody said to you at some point in your life, this is a chair. And if you were to learn another language, you would learn that this is maybe a silla in Spanish. You would develop new language and new information about the chair. So that's also what anxiety requires, is new information about the things that it fears. It's like putting a new layer. You know, if you're making a sandwich, you know that you've got to put layers to create the sandwich, and then it becomes something new. And that's what anxiety also needs, is it needs new information on top. That means that the original memories, that the mind is referencing becomes something new. Does everything I've said make sense so far? If there are any questions on anything that I've said, go ahead and ask me while I take a sip of water. No? Well, good morning, everybody. We're talking about how to overcome stress and anxiety, and I'm just giving some very simple pointers. And thanks, Sophie. When it comes to stress and anxiety, the sensations of stress and anxiety can feel so overwhelming, like it's something that we're not going to be able to come out the other side of because it feels so massive, like a mountain that we have to climb. But never underestimate the value of really small shifts, really tiny things that can make a difference, because that's so important when working through anxiety. It's not one singular thing that's going to remove you from a cycle of anxiety. It's a compounding effect of lots and lots of little things, like little grains of sand will eventually make a beach. So never think that all of the effort you've been making to work on your stress and anxiety hasn't been making a difference. It has. It's just you have to sort of fine tune it and refine the formula sometimes. So I would really think about what the kind of key messages are that your anxiety need. So how you can begin to do this, that the way to work with stress and anxiety, I mean, you hear a lot of people give you kind of tips that of course will help, like breathing more or spending more time walking, being in the sun more. These are all wonderful things that you can do that will really help your stress and anxiety. But the best thing you can do to work through stress and anxiety is create an approach to stress and anxiety. So one of the first things that you can do when approaching your stress and anxiety is what people will find when they're tending to spiral down quite fast is that they have now got stressed about the stress, or they're anxious about the anxiety. So they are now creating an anxiety about the anxiety about the anxiety about the anxiety, and that makes it much, much bigger and much harder to leave. So what you can do is, you've halved the problem if you've said, I'm not going to get stressed about my stress. I'm going to accept right now, here in this moment, I am stressed. Acceptance of where you are right now and whatever you're feeling is incredibly powerful, because it halves. Often it completely removes, but it removes the anxiety about the anxiety, the stress about the stress, the sadness about the sadness, the grief about the grief. Do you see what I'm saying? So just accepting, this is how I feel today. I'm going to accept that today I feel absolutely rubbish. I feel sad, I feel angry, I feel fed up, I feel tired. Acceptance of your feelings is a really powerful place to start. And then when you've halved it, you've got more space to be able to examine. And actually I would say, go and see somebody if you're able to. Go and see somebody who can help you understand what it's really about better. But if you're not able to, implement an approach where you're saying, right, it's always around Wednesday at about 10:15 in the morning, after I've had a night with so-and-so and so-and-so, and I wake up and I take this route to work, I get really upset and annoyed. Why is that? Why does that happen? Why do I get upset? Then you're starting to be really curious about why you feel the way you feel, when you feel the way you feel it, what could be going on, what factors could be at play unconsciously that are creating anxious thoughts, anxious feelings. And then with that information, you can start to be more proactive in your own healing journey of saying, actually, it's really interesting that I've kind of figured out that this person that I hang around with on a Tuesday night when I wake up anxious on a Wednesday reminds me of a school teacher that I had when I was 15 who used to make me feel really sad and upset and incompetent. And then you're sort of getting somewhere with why you get certain feelings and certain information about certain feelings. So it's the more you sort of look at the specifics of your anxiety, the more you're able to get out of it easily. So you want to try and divide it, dissect it, and look at it without judgment and with total curiosity and acceptance. And just I'm just more interested about how I got to be me rather than I'm judging how I became myself. Does that make sense so far? Are there any questions on that? And I can slow down. I can fill in any gaps. Anybody got anything they want to say? Also, thank you so much for being here and watching this and just talking about anxiety and stress as just a normal part of the human experience, because everybody gets stressed, everybody gets anxious. There's not one person walking the planet that doesn't, because we're hardwired for it. We're supposed to feel anxious feelings. They're supposed to be indicators of what we are to avoid, what we are to run away from, what could be dangerous for us. Knowing that, we have to recognise that actually we don't have to treat every single feeling we feel in our body as fact. It's information, it's not definition. They are predictions based on what we know from before. So we don't have to say, oh, I've been sent a terrible feeling, that must mean it's true, that must mean that something terrible is about to happen. It's not. It's just your unconscious saying, I'm putting two and two together here. I think that based on the prediction, based on the algorithm that I've been holding on to, this and this means danger. And the wonderful thing is that your mind, these algorithms, some of them are more hardwired. They've been there a little bit longer. They're a bit more, they've been used a bit more. So they're sturdier. They're harder to work with, but they're not impossible. And changing the thoughts that create the feelings by thinking about them in a different way, gaining a new perspective, looking at them from a slightly different angle, will radically change the response. So the feelings that you are experiencing only exist as a result of the thoughts that your unconscious is sending you, and those thoughts are based on predictions of things that it knows from before. So if you change the original thought, you change the feeling. If you change the feeling, you'll change the response. You change the response, you'll change your life, because the actions that you'll take will be completely different. So it's thinking about those original thoughts. What are the thoughts that I hold on to? What are those beliefs that I hold on to that create the thoughts that make me? And do I want them? Can I choose to think different thoughts? Because we think that we're hardwired. I was born with this selection of thoughts, and that's how it's always going to be for me. But they're not. There are thoughts that have changed throughout your life. I'm sure you don't have the same haircut you had when you were 15. I'm sure you don't have the same things on your walls. Probably don't wear the same clothes. But thoughts linked to your survival will be more stubborn. They have to be. If we change them too quickly, we might be putting ourselves in danger. So they're not ever changing. They don't move around from day to day and become something new, because that would be like setting up a really fancy alarm system in your home and then saying, you know what, today I think I'm just going to change the alarm system completely. Maybe I actually won't put it on at all. That could be the day that you really needed that alarm system. So the unconscious mind doesn't just turn off your alarm systems and say, you know what, I think I'm going to tinker about with the anxiety response, because that could be the day that it actually really needs that response. So it's up to us to sort of slowly examine the parts of the response and say, do I really need an alarm for this? And is this even a truth? This original thought that the alarm response is set off in me, is that a truth? Do I need to hold on to that? Is there so much danger waiting around the corner? Or can I trust? Can I trust myself to know that I can do this because I've done it before and I've done similar things and I'm super competent and I've always found a way out of the things that have frightened me? So that's more of an approach, but that's the way that I work with anxiety. I mean, you can absolutely implement, prioritize sleep. That is fundamental. That's number one, because even implementing an approach is not going to be more powerful than a really, really incredible night's sleep, where you give your body everything it needs and resets it. moving more, eating better, and then implementing an approach to anxiety where you're not afraid of your anxiety. The fear of the fear of the fear of the fear of the fear is a trap that's quite easy to get stuck in. So just accepting, I feel afraid. Why is that? Why do I feel afraid right now? What is going on with me that I feel so scared? And then you can start to solve the mystery. Because there's always a mystery. We'd love to think that we're so completely random and none of it makes any sense at all. And there's always a reason. Always, always, always. 10 years working with the unconscious, I've never seen it not make sense. I've never said, gosh, that's so random. Why would that person do that to that to that? It's always come around full circle and they've been able to see for themselves. Oh, of course, my mind creates a prediction because that happened to me. And it's not worked through that yet. It keeps cross-referencing back to that and getting afraid that we're going to be back in that original situation. So it's trying to keep me away from that. But if I help my unconscious mind, no, we're never going to have that situation happen to us again. We're good. We've learnt, we've moved through it. We are going in a different direction. It won't have to keep reminding me. So for the last 8 minutes, any questions? No silly questions ever. Anxiety is just something to be discussed and explored and talked about openly. I love talking about anxiety because it's part of the human experience. We all have anxieties. We all have fears. We all have complex thoughts that lead to complex feelings. I'm so happy to answer any questions though. Anybody? No? Well, thank you for being here. And I'll talk about some other things then. I'll talk about anxiety a little bit more for the time we have left. Oh, unfortunately employers don't understand it, but I'm glad mental health is being taken seriously now. Yes, it's frustrating that employers don't understand anxiety. And like you say, it is being discussed more freely and openly now. I think after the pandemic, and I imagine that, going back into the workplace, there's going to be a lot of changes in how we approach this because it's been discussed so freely and openly. And yes, it is incredibly frustrating when it's not understood. But if you feel misunderstood and that others don't understand you, hold space to understand yourself. That's a wonderful thing you can do for yourself. Not everybody has to understand the complex and interesting universe of thoughts, feelings and emotions that is me. But I can understand myself and I can approach myself and my own thoughts with acceptance, curiosity and trust. Trust that I came to be this way for reasons. I'm not just random, I'm not cursed, I'm not punished. I'm just me, being me, having a human experience with all of the complex and interesting feelings that I'm capable of. Anybody else got anything that they want to say or anything that they're thinking of that they'd like to ask? We've got 5 minutes. I'm so happy to answer any questions, any thoughts on how to beat anxiety. I'll just talk again about what I've been talking about, which is the greatest thing you can do when working with anxiety is recognise that small things add up. Little tiny shifts do make a massive difference. They're like grains of sand on a beach. Never think that the effort that you're making to work on your anxiety isn't working. It takes time to change processes, and that's the thing with intangible things we can't see that are going on inside the mind. We don't know what it looks like in there and what's happening as we change different thoughts. We can't see it for ourselves. We can only tell by how we're changing. So you have to really take time to notice the changes that are being made through the actions that you're taking and celebrate them. That's really helpful, because they can go unnoticed quite easily, and the unconscious with so many other things to be paying attention to, all the fears, all the noise, coronavirus, pandemic hysteria, it can be quite easy to not notice all of the changes that you're making and that are going on underneath the behind the eyes in the mind. So take time to celebrate the changes that are made through choosing not to engage in thoughts. This is not me saying that you can choose your thinking, because actually when you're quite in it, it's quite difficult to change in the moment. But give your mind permission to not buy into the stories that the unconscious presents, because that's the thing, when we're taken in by fear, the unconscious parts of our thinking are incredible at making up stories and narratives around what's going on that make it really compelling. If it just simply said to you, don't speak in public, you'd say, well, I've got to, that's my job. I don't have a choice. So I'm going to go and speak in public. What it will do instead is create a story that says, you're the worst at speaking in public. No one's ever spoken in public as badly as you. You're going to make a fool of yourself. Do you remember that time when you were 4 and you fell on your face? It creates a story that we find really compelling, and then we buy into the story and say, oof, I'm not going to do that. Don't buy into the story. Recognise why the story exists, what the intention of the story is, but you don't have to go into it. And I'm going to write my Instagram here so that you can find me later. And if you've got any questions that you want to ask me, you can come and find me on my Instagram. I'm happy to answer any questions that you've got from this talk. Just continue the conversation, really. Before I go, any other questions, anything else that anybody wants to ask or say? If not, I've really enjoyed talking to you about anxiety. I hope that it's been helpful. You don't have to implement everything that's been discussed here, but even if you just take 1 or 2 pointers and say, okay, that's interesting. I'm going to try approaching my anxiety with curiosity instead of judgment. I'm going to try just accepting that I feel the way I feel today and see if that makes a difference. Recognising that it's not one singular event. You don't do it once and say, oh, how come that didn't work? That would be a bit like, here in the fitness community, you would think it would be absurd if somebody said to you, I did 1 push-up and I'm not where I want to be yet. So that's not how it works. You need to keep going. It's not one time. It's compounding. It's doing it over and over and over, and it becoming a practice and part of a process. So approach it like that. It's not just one singular event, one time, that's going to be the thing that solves the anxiety. It's going to be approaching it in a different way. That will make a big bit of difference. Thank you, Sophie Mystic. Thank you to you for being here. And yeah, I hope you have a wonderful day, a wonderful morning. I hope that you feel a little bit differently about your stresses and anxieties, and just recognise they're just a part of the human experience. They're part of what makes us us, part of our protective mechanisms that have led us to being as sophisticated as we are and having the experience that we have. They're not to be feared, they're to be understood and worked with, so that we can have a calmer and quieter and more peaceful human experience. And if you'd like to know more about me, you can find me on my page. I'm Jessica Boston. You can find me there. I'm a hypnotherapist, and I talk about things related to stress, anxiety, confidence, hypnotherapy. And you can also find my meditation album on my page. I hope you have a wonderful day, and make the most of this Wednesday and make the most of your week. Speak soon.